Come Santa Claus, come Santa Claus, down Santa Claus.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel for the first video of the holiday season, and I figured what better way to get started than with a kind of holiday classic, the roasted beef Wellington. Now, the only other experience I have with this is when I tried Gordon Ramsay's beef Wellington, and although I thought it came out okay, it tasted pretty good, you guys did not shy away from pointing out every little thing wrong in the comments. I didn't cook out my mushrooms long enough, so it resulted in a little bit too much moisture at the end. I did agree when you guys said that I didn't get a good enough sear on the meat at the very beginning. Luckily though, Tasty just released their Beef Wellington 101 for the noobs like us to make every step as easy and foolproof as possible. This was the perfect excuse for me to have another crack at this recipe, and who better to test out if all that stuff is true, so let's get right into this one. In my opinion, no one individual step is that difficult for a beef Wellington. You gotta sear your meat, dice up and cook down your mushrooms, and then just wrap everything together, basically. It's kind of the marriage of everything that might be a little bit challenging, making sure all your components are seasoned and cooked well, and in order to make it, you will need some vegetable oil and cognac, salt, pepper, butter, and puff pastry, lots of some good old prosciutto and some spicy horseradish mustard, 2 shallots, about a pound of mixed mushrooms, garlic, an egg, and a big old slab of a beef tenderloin. So like I said, no one part of this is all that difficult, and we're gonna be starting with the mushroom duxelle. Now this was one of my weakest portions of the last attempt. I definitely undercooked them, there was way too much water in them. And that's why I love the idea of baking these rather than just cooking them off in a saute pan. I did still have a little bit of difficulty with this stupid ass food processor. I don't know if it's just cheap or mushrooms don't love being chopped evenly in a food processor. Even pulsing this in batches, mixing it constantly, you still get little pockets of like mushroom puree and then mushrooms that just refuse to get chopped up. It's really no biggie, I just chopped up the remaining few by hand, loaded them onto my cookie sheet, and then baked them off at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes. Next up, we are gonna attack the beef tenderloin, which I am always scared of screwing up. I feel like I have Gordon Ramsay over my shoulder, ready to call me a donkey if I cut off too much of this. And even though I always remove as little as possible, you know, just the huge pockets of fat, the silver skin, and then the tips at the ends that are just not wide enough for this application, I still feel like I always waste so much of this. I shouldn't say waste, because we do cook some of the scraps up for sandwiches or roast them with some vegetables, but unless I'm just getting hosed by the butcher counter, I always feel like my tenderloins come out a little bit smaller than everybody else's. Anyway, I got my beef tied up in some butcher's twine. For what reason, I don't know. I got a nice sear on it, this time in my cast iron. This guy is gonna get a very generous brushing of the horseradish mustard, and then lounge out in the fridge for about an hour or more until we get started with everything else. One thing I'll mention is there is a whole lot of rotations in and out of the fridge for this recipe, so definitely plan ahead. This isn't something you can start at like 3 o'clock if you want to eat dinner around 5 or 6. Unless, of course, you're like my family who eats dinner at 8:30, so 3 o'clock would be just fine, I guess. I chopped up my 2 shallots, 4 cloves of garlic, and they're gonna get cooked right in the same pan that the beef was sauteed in. And those guys, along with some butter and then some cognac to deglaze the whole thing, is gonna make this mixture taste extremely good. Tasty didn't mention this, but if you're cooking on an open flame style gas oven, take your pan off of the heat to add the cognac. You might just get a little bit of a fiery surprise. Or if you're like me and you're bored, light it up on purpose for no other reason than entertainment. Just watch your eyelashes, your arm hairs, and you'll be just fine. The mixture gets finished off with a little bit of salt and pepper and all of those dried out mushrooms. I think I could eat all this with a spoon just right now and call it a day and be happy. But we cannot. Those have to chill in the fridge for at least an hour or two. And in the meantime, we can get started with laying out all our prosciutto. This part caused yet another bit of controversy in the comments last time. I mentioned how I've only ever seen Gordon Ramsay use prosciutto for this step, as opposed to a crepe or a pancake of some kind. Based on my research, the crepe is in fact the more traditionally used ingredient, but both are in there for the main purpose of just being a moisture barrier between your layers. But the ham adds extra little depth of flavor and meatiness, so I imagine chefs are kind of like, why not? The beef gets wrapped up the first time in your layer of prosciutto and mushrooms, rolled into a very tight log, and then sat in the fridge for another hour. While we wait, we have to roll out the puff pastry to an inch or two larger than the circumference and the length of this thing. Don't forget your brushing of egg wash, that will seal all this together. And then when you get your beef rolled up in your pastry, get the sides crimped and kind of tucked underneath, it's gonna sit in the fridge for yet another hour. I warned you guys ahead of time, this recipe is not something you want to attempt last minute. And because I'm already hours into this thing, I figured why not take the extra step, just like Tasty did, and use my extra puff pastry to slice up some strips, cut out some cute little gingerbreads, just to finish this with some little holiday flair. The weave pattern was a little bit annoying just because the more you touch this pastry, the warmer it gets, and you want it to stay as cold as possible so it puffs up. But I was able to get it looking decent. I got my little gingerbread stuck on there. I coated this entire thing in egg wash and then baked it off at 425 degrees for about 40 minutes. I made the executive decision to temp this thing to make sure I took it out at the exact perfect temperature. So I removed it at about 125 degrees because it'll continue cooking out of the oven. And if you thought now is the time you can finally eat, you'd be wrong, because according to Tasty, you gotta let this rest for at least another hour. Will this thing be ice cold by then? Potentially, but I waited it out, I cut into the middle. This is much closer to medium. I usually like my steak much closer to rare, but I'm sure it'll taste great, so I plated it up and it is finally time to give this a shot. Holy sh! I don't know how the temperature of this thing went up another 15 to 18 degrees if I pulled it at 125. It's kind of really weird to me. And the only thing this is missing is a lamb sauce. This thing is cooked to medium and it still eats like butter. Like 4 or 5 chews and it's gone. It's so tender. Everything is seasoned so well. The mushrooms, I love the extra meaty saltiness that the prosciutto adds. It's not soggy at all, which is probably the biggest downfall of the last attempt. This piece of food overall is just so perfect. This whole thing is just an umami bomb too. Between the pork, all the mushrooms, and the beef, I would imagine this is as close as you can get to eating pure MSG. I'm gonna sit here and enjoy this for a while. Merry Christmas. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, leave me a big old like. Once again, welcome to the holiday videos. I got some somewhat exciting things planned. Maybe not to the degree of October, but they should still be pretty good. Follow me over on follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you do not already. And other than that, have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you right back here next time. Peace.
With the M without the AD. Flipping burgers and my money super lazy. Try and make a meal tonight, they ain't paying me. Try and supersize my life with my 18. Yeah, our style wasn't wavy, but we had a vision.